Hey, what's up there, Hexers? This is Function here, and I'm bringing you part 3 of my PvP champion breakdown. There's 20 PvP champions in total, 4 in each color, and today we're going to be talking about the Blood champions. Remember, all champions use basic actions with a once per turn limit. If you're kind of curious about the other ways in which champions work, or you have some questions about them, I would suggest that you watch my video where I kind of talk about all that stuff, and I will link it in the description, so take a look. Anyways, let's jump right in and look at what we're got today. So, the first one is Gozog. Gozog is a necrotic warrior. His charge power is 1 blood threshold, 2 charges, deal 1 damage to target champion, and gain 1 life. So, let's look at the pros and the cons. Alright, so the pros, first off, just like the other necrotic champions, his name is a palindrome. And that means it's the same whether you pronounce it forwards or backwards, it's still Gozog, either way. I think this is the last of the necrotic champions I'm going to be talking about too, so no more palindromes. Anyways, what has he got going for him? Well, since his charge power has such a low cost, you're going to be able to use it frequently throughout the course of the game, probably getting 2, 3, maybe even 4 activations as the game goes along, and you're going to be getting incremental advantage from each of those activations. This kind of works in one of 2 ways. The first of which is if you're playing an aggressive deck, it's basically free damage. You're probably going to be getting about 3 activations for an aggressive deck, which means you're basically starting your opponent at 17 life. If all you care about is ending the game as quickly as possible by bringing them from 20 to 0, well, starting them off at 17 is a big step forward for you. That's really about the value you're getting out of one of your cards, is 3 damage to them. So getting those kind of activations is definitely going to go a long way towards ending the game quickly, and that's exactly what you want. The other way this guy is really good for you is if you're trying to stabilize. So maybe your opponent has you on the ropes and they're dealing damage to each turn. If you're able to gain 3 or 4 life over the course of the game, you might buy yourself an extra turn or 2 to finally stabilize and gain control, at which point you're going to be the one in the lead, and you'll probably come out on top if you're able to buy yourself some extra turns like that. So since it's only 2 charges and it's a single threshold, this will fit really well in just about any deck, even if you're playing 2 colors, possibly even 3, even though I don't think there's going to be all that many 3-color decks. But if you're playing a 2-color deck, you could still very easily splash Gozog, even if you're not primarily Blood. Alright, what are his cons? Well, the big ones are it's unlikely to matter in over-the-top games. If you and your opponent are just trading blows with dragons maybe and dealing 6 or 12 damage a turn, well, gaining 1 life and dealing 1 damage is unlikely to even matter at all in the course of the game. If you're dealing so much damage that the game could just end in 1 turn, then it doesn't really matter if you gained 1 life. This really didn't contribute anything towards the outcome of the game. Also, it's not nearly as good in slower decks, and the reason I say that is even though it might help you stabilize against aggressive decks, if you're not playing against an aggressive deck, it's unlikely to do very much. So if I'm playing a slower deck, like a control deck or something, and I'm paired against aggro, great, I just gained myself some time, I probably gained myself a couple turns, and my opponent had to expend more cards from their hand in order to get victory. But if I'm playing a slow deck and I'm paired against another slow deck, well, I could probably be doing other things with my champion than dealing 1 damage and gaining 1 life. It's not going to kind of push me over the edge where all of a sudden I have the advantage. 1 life is really unlikely to matter, 2 life is still probably unlikely to matter, and 3 is unlikely to matter in a control mirror match. You're going to be wanting to get something that gives you that swingy advantage. The final thing I'll say about Gozog is, to me at least, it kind of feels like an arms race type champion, where the more people that are playing him in a given tournament, the more advantage you're going to get by playing him yourself as well. Like, he cancels himself out if both players are using him, and if a lot of people are playing him in a tournament, then that means that there's more aggressive decks than not, and even if you're not playing an aggressive deck, you're going to have an advantage by playing him and getting some life back. It still might not be the best one to play against an aggressive deck, but it's going to be an option for you. So let's finish talking about him. Let's move on to the next one. Second up is Zarad Venomscorn. He is a nasty guy. Anyways, he is a Venom Rogue, 1 blood threshold, 3 charges, target troop gets permanent -1, -0. So what are the pros and the cons in this guy's case? Well, for one of the pros, I should have said he has some sweet artwork. I really like his art. I think the Venom guys look really cool. Anyhow, what are his pros? Well, he can kind of act as pseudo removal. If your opponent has a troop that only has one attack and you give it 0, well, now it's not going to be able to attack anymore. You basically removed it from the game unless it has other abilities. Now it's just forced into a chump block troop. But really, and it could also work, I guess, as if you have a 2-2 and your opponent has a 2-2 and you're just kind of stalled, you could give it -1, and now they just have a 1-2 and you can start swinging in without being afraid of losing your guy. Since it's a single threshold, it's splashable in most decks, but still I'm not particularly impressed by him. What are the cons? Well, the con is just one that's pretty big, and it's that it's unlikely to make a large impact. Just giving one random troop -1, -0 really isn't going to help you that much. I mean, especially if your opponent is swinging in with really large troops, say they have a dragon that's swinging in for 5 a turn, well, giving it -1 attack isn't really going to help you live that much longer. It's kind of different than Gozog, where he's gaining you life actively. This one, it doesn't quite do the same thing, not at least in my eyes. So, the final thing I want to say about him is something that's unlikely to ever matter, but it's a little extra note that it can target your own troops. There's nothing so far that I've seen where it's like, oh yeah, I want to give my troops less attack. But if there were such a thing in the future, this guy would be something to keep in mind. I doubt that'll ever be the case anytime soon, but you never know. Every once in a while a really weird interaction pops up, and this will be a way to utilize it if it does. Let's move on to our third one. Our third one is BunJitsu. Oh, I love the Shinhar. I think they're so cool. Anyhow, he is a Shinhar Warlock with a 2 blood threshold, 4 charge ability. Exhaust 2 target troops you control. They transform into an abomination with attack equal to their combined attack and defense equal to their combined defense. So, before I go into things, the way I read this is you take 2 guys, they kind of fuse together to form one big abomination. You're not getting 2 abominations out of it. That we don't exactly know what abilities the abomination has. We haven't seen what that card looks like. So it might just be a vanilla guy. It might retain the abilities of its former selves. If one of them had flight and one of them had steadfast, maybe against both of them. I think that's really unlikely. I think it'll just turn into a new guy and not retain any of its old abilities. So let's move on and talk about the pros and cons, and we'll get back to some of the uses maybe. So the pros is it works really well with temporary troops. Say you have a troop that you just put in play and you have to sacrifice it at the end of the turn. Well, if you combine it with BunJitsu, you're not really losing anything. You're just making your existing troop bigger. Also, it can possibly disable some removal. So if the abomination doesn't retain any of the abilities of its original selves, then say somebody used Inner Conflict on one of your guys, meaning that it wouldn't be able to attack or defend anymore for the rest of the game. Well, if you use BunJitsu to combine that troop with another, now you're just making the un-inner conflicted guy stronger, basically, and taking your inner conflicted one out of the game. So that's definitely something to consider. It's still kind of a weird ability, so it's going to be one that's going to take a lot of effort to make it work. You're going to have to build a deck where it's like, oh, this is a BunJitsu deck. It's still a lot of fun. I think that's why they put it in here, is it's one of those cards that's just fun to try to make it work. Alright, so what are the cons? Well, if it works straight up, as I've already described, it's always, or almost always, going to be card disadvantage. If you have 2 guys that are unaffected, they're just normal guys, and you exhaust both of them to turn them into an abomination, well, now you traded 2 guys to make one bigger one, and usually that's not necessarily what you wanted to do. If that abomination got removed, then your opponent basically killed 2 cards for the price of 1. And one other thing to note here is, as far as I know, transformed troops or artifacts or whatever it is, transformed cards retain the state of their previous selves. So in this case, if you exhaust both target troops you control, I would imagine that the abomination might come into play exhausted. This one is kind of weird since you're combining 2 cards to make 1, so I'm really not sure. But Yeah. And then the final con is that the Abomination probably does not retain the abilities. It retains the state, I would think, but not the abilities. So if it doesn't retain flight, you're really never going to want to play this in a deck with creatures that have abilities, and that means you're playing a deck with all vanilla creatures. Well, who wants to do that? That just doesn't seem very good to me. Anyhow, he's definitely still interesting. It's a kind of a fun card, and that's why he's there. Let's move on to the final champion I'll be doing the breakdown for, and our final one up is Herkzeg. I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to say his name, but that's how I'll say it. Anyways, he's an Orc Warrior, 2 blood threshold, 4 charges, deal 2 damage to you, and draw a card. I think I would say, like, deal 2 damage to yourself. To you just reads funny to me, but that's not important. Anyway, so it's deal 2 damage and draw a card. So what are the pros and what are the cons in this guy's case? Well, this guy's definitely pretty strong, and 4 charges is a great cost to draw a card. If you think about it like this, that there's a card called Oracle Song, which costs 3 resources and draws you 2 cards. So basically you're paying 1 card and your turn 3 to draw 2 cards. Well, in this guy's case, you're basically getting the same value out of it, but you're not sacrificing your 3rd turn in order to do it. You're still getting +1 card in your hand, because Oracle Song really only nets you +1. Herkzeg also nets you +1, and you're having that card available to you on turn 4. Both cards enable that. Oracle Song does have the advantage that you're kind of seeing more cards, but that's not what I'm really trying to get at. What I'm trying to get at is drawing an extra card on turn 4 without actually using any resources is really great. A lot of decks are going to revolve around what they're doing on turn 4, and if they have an extra card in their hand on that turn, well, they're going to be in really good shape. So the other pro is that there are many life gain effects in the blood threshold color, and that's going to be able to counteract some of the damage that you're taking from using his ability often. If you're doing some life drain effects or playing a card that gives you life based on how much damage your opponent took, something like that, well, all of a sudden, really, this card just reads 4 charges, draw a card, because the 2 damage isn't going to really matter much in the grand scheme of things. What are his cons? Well, his cons are kind of the flip side of what I was just saying, is that if you're already at low health, you might be taking a risk by activating this card. Say you're at 6 or 7 life, playing this card could potentially mean that your opponent top decks a burn spell or something strong on their turn and just takes you out of the game because you use this ability. So if you're at low health, always be aware of what you're playing against, and do they have potential to kill you if you take 2 damage all of a sudden. If so, you might want to weigh your chances. Sometimes you're going to just want to take the risk. You might be losing the game if you didn't, so you just need to draw that card and see what you get. Alright, so that just about wraps it up. We're going to say, what's the best of the bunch for the ones I've talked about today? Well, I would say that Herkzeg is the best of the bunch. The ability to draw a card, especially early on in the game, as opposed to some of the other champions I've already talked about, is definitely pretty strong. The ability is great. Who is it? Gozog definitely has a lot going for him, but they're going to kind of feel like they belong in different types of decks, so they're not really competing against each other in that sense. I definitely think this guy's strong. You'll definitely see him played a lot, and I still think you'll probably see Gozog played quite a bit as well too. So, stay tuned for more exciting news. Gen Con's right around the corner, and I'm hoping to do some stuff related to that. I will be going to Gen Con, and Cryptozoic's going to be previewing a lot of Hex stuff there. There's going to be the developers there and a bunch of other folks, so I hope to get a chance to talk to them and get some more stuff for you guys, some exclusive interview or something like that. Would be wonderful. Anyway, stay tuned, subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. Less fail, more function.